Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we're checking out a little something by the name of Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 3. Now don't worry, you haven't missed anything. This is not in fact the third of a trilogy, rather this map pack is inspired by an album by metal band Helloween called Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 3. Specifically, it's inspired by Disc 1 of Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 3, and the songs contained therein. Still with me? Good. Don't worry, it gets simpler from here on in. Before I get in too deep, however, I'd like to proudly announce my sponsor for this edition of Doom Mod Madness, Pain Elementos, the chocolatey taste of pain with an additional hint of rubbery damnation. Wait a minute. Are these just pain elemental buttholes? Why would you even eat that? As for the structure of Keeper of the Seven Keys, it does indeed revolve around you acquiring 7 keys. The first one, hands down the easiest, what with the introductory section of level, leading you neatly into this hub area where you then have free reign to pick and choose which level you'll tackle next. In my case, I decided to tackle these levels in a counterclockwise fashion, which led naturally to Silent Rain being my first map of choice. And it's here that you'll discover that Keeper of the Seven Keys is far from your traditional style of map pack. In fact, for the most part, each individual map here seems to contain its own particular gimmick, one that you'll have to pay close attention to if you fancy getting through the level without suffering a faintly embarrassing number of deaths. If you're still wondering about the gimmick behind Silent Rain, it essentially turns the vast majority of the level into a no-fire zone, something that it freely taunts you about by actually providing you with a weapon practically at the start. If you use it, well, you've seen what happens. You get comprehensively hosed down by the resident security turrets. To avoid that unpleasant fate, you'll have to play Dodge the Demon, skillfully navigating your way around enemies and hopefully corralling them into a position that allows you to progress without taking too many licks. It's only natural then that on your first few forays through this level, you'll seek to test the limits of the security system. After all, shots taken from this vent shaft doesn't seem to trigger the turrets, but once you step out into the open, the judgment is swift. Mercifully, this level does eventually offer you some respite for that itchy trigger finger. All you need to do is dodge your way through this room and reach a switch located at the back. This will drop some security shutters over those turrets and allow you to blast away with impunity. I would recommend, however, making swift work of any enemies in the area because those shutters will not stay down for long. That said, you can always re-trigger the shutters, allowing you to mop up whatever is left behind. It'll also give you a nice opportunity to appreciate the early warning system that's in effect here, an outer shutter raising slowly before the actual shutter itself pops up and places you back in the line of fire. After that, escalation very much seems to be the name of the game, with increased numbers of enemies forcing you to take drastic measures in order to draw their attention and open up those vital escape routes. Your ability to fight back has once again been taken away, and at this point you really start to appreciate the downright trollish nature of enemy monster placement. Adding an additional wrinkle to this level is the presence of safe zones where you can freely fire from and not risk the wrath of the turrets. Naturally, this is followed up by dropping you into a section with no such free fire platform to start from, instead forcing you to engage in the oh shit shimmy as you frantically dart about the level, trying to figure out the best possible way to not die. As it happens, this will probably take you more than one attempt to figure out, as it involves successfully baiting certain enemies into destroying groups of other enemies in front of them, blocking the path. To say that this section is somewhat fiendishly designed would be a third bit of an understatement, but I can still very much appreciate how it forces you to think in very different terms when it comes to engaging these enemies. And I'm not gonna lie, I felt pretty smug for pitting these enemies against each other while I merrily skipped through that opportunistic gap that was created. Sure, I might be slightly singed, but it's all in the effort of reaching that vital safe zone where I can more adequately vent my frustrations. Keeping the dickish setups rolling to the very end, Silent Rain caps itself off with a situation that involves 4 barons, a safe zone, and a crusher that means you can't linger there for long. Honestly, I gotta applaud this one. It's an impressively designed pain in the ass. One that provided me with a palpable sense of relief once I finally grabbed that key. Oh boy, Mrs. God, this one is a doozy, and it spends precious little time acquainting you with how much of a doozy it is gonna be. Can you guess what the gimmick is yet? But this opening section is wonderfully claustrophobic, making you frantically dodge between those cannon blasts from the spider mastermind lurking at the heart of the level, while also introducing periodically monsters to keep you on your toes and prevent you from cowering in fear in any particular corner for too long. Despite giving you free rein to take advantage of the weaponry littered around this level, Mrs. God shares an attribute with Silent Rain in that it is constantly applying pressure to the player. Seriously, if I had one word to describe the feeling of playing through Mrs. God as a level, it would be relentless. Near enough, each new section that you'll enter during the course of this level will provide you with a space that just feels ever so slightly too small for the number of enemies contained within. More often than not, as a consequence, you'll find yourself repeatedly on the back foot, desperately trying to evade a potentially fatal chomp or scratch to the face. Add in the occasional pelting of projectiles from above, forcing you to dodge and weave even more effectively. You've got yourself here a recipe for some real high-tension situations. Entertainingly, this level never lets you forget about the spider mastermind lurking at its core. Sections of level taking you past open vantage points that will occasionally see you just flat out obliterated by the mastermind's heavy-duty cannons. And at this point, it's probably worth mentioning that the core gameplay here is something more than simply vanilla. As some of you may have already correctly surmised, Keeper of the Seven Keys does indeed come bundled with some form of brutal doom, albeit a much more streamlined version. And personally, I feel like it fits the frantic nature of these levels rather well, while also delivering that nice visceral kick that comes from defeating troublesome enemies. Despite the frantic and relentless pacing of this level, there's still just enough time to appreciate the level design that's operating here. Some really neat and fun looping design that has you crisscrossing through previously visited sections, such as the elevator, whose doors open to grant you access to new areas. You've got this section here, which has you raising platforms to leverage the height against crossing the gap. And then you've got the cherry on top of the cake, which is that final mad dash against the cannons of the mastermind. An absolute adrenaline surge of a moment. I was audibly yelling throughout this section, just trying to barge past these troublesome enemies, but it was all worth it to finally press that button, bring down the buzzsaws, and put paid to the menace of the mastermind. Pleasure Drone is initially a bit of a tricky map to get to grips with, and that's because it asks a player to engage in a little bit of trial and error before they can truly get going. For example, the opening corridor through here has a rather tantalizing button. You shouldn't press that button. That button spells death. Instead, you should just ignore the button, because the door opens anyway, and you can deal with whatever lurks on the other side, steal its chain gun, and then comprehensively murder everything in the room. Now, this may lead you to believe that the gimmick of this level is centered around devious troll buttons. That is not the case. In fact, you may not even notice what the gimmick contained within this level is until you're a fair few encounters deep, because enough of these early ones are just so chaotic that they manage to effectively mask what's going on. Eventually, however, you should discover that one of the enemies here is in fact a friend. The Cybruiser, the metallic barren-looking enemy in the middle platform there, actually heals you when it shoots you. So effectively, this transforms certain sections of this level into keep the Cybruiser alive, because Cybruiser is friend, heal, doom guy. Be wary of getting a little too close to a healing Cybruiser, however. For all of the health that they return with the love gun, their hands will equally tear it back away from you. In comparison to the first two levels that I experienced with Keeper of the Seven Keys, this is a lot less overwhelmingly frantic in terms of pacing. You get much more opportunity to take a breather, consider what your next move may be, and as for the encounters with enemies, much more manageable. That's not to say that there's any less of them to deal with, some situations resulting in downright glorious gore explosions. For all of the wonderful inclusion of the Cybruisers during the course of this map, I can't help but feel they're not quite as heavily entrenched in the design of it as, let's say, the gimmicks of the previous two maps. I could easily imagine them being swapped out with some strategically placed medkits, and in that regard, I can't help but feel that this level could have done with something a little extra on top. Maybe take advantage of that trollish button at the start, and maybe pepper more fiendish surprises throughout the course of this level's runtime. Even then, I'd say that this is a pretty fun, reasonably well-balanced map, and if the worst crime I can think of for it is that it doesn't quite reach the same lofty, panic-ridden heights as the preceding two, then I guess it's not doing too bad at all. If I had to sum up Born on Judgment Day in a clear and concise manner, I think that initially it would go something like this. So yeah, this is somewhat a return to the intensity that hallmarked the first two levels. Enemies seem to come thick and fast. Staying still for too long is going to get you roundly pelted with balls of death, and the only recourse is to keep moving forward and to keep shooting everything in sight. It's only really the tail end of this particular room here when things seem to feel like they're calming down somewhat, and even then it introduces an archvile into the goddamn mix. As for the gimmick that supposedly permeates this map, I'd be hard-pressed to say that there actually is one, rather that the map is the gimmick itself. It's all centered around this earthen pile in the middle that you'll slowly ascend throughout the course of the map, snaking your route through sunken castles and battlements and various rooms, taking on all comers in the way, and roundly making an absolute mess of the place. It's honestly a straightforward, relentless rollercoaster ride of a map, and makes up for its lack of, let's say, standout set-piece moments by just being damn well put together. So yeah, Born on Judgment Day. Pretty friggin' fun. That, and I've got a soft spot for levels that practically end where they begin. The name of this next one should give you some kind of idea of what to expect during the course of it. I mean, sure, there's visible enemies, all the easier to use a stick to hit in the face with, but it's when you whip out the old rocket launcher that you gotta make sure you pay close attention to what may or may not be in front of you. And any of you that are familiar with me and my track record with rocket launchers know that that is a bit of a big ask. Now, the invisible enemy of choice here is, of course, the Spectre, and it is truly invisible here. No transparent outline to give it away, only the ripples in the water, the noise it makes, and maybe the occasional cheeky nibble on the backside when you're not looking. Naturally, this all has the effect of having you approach situations just a little bit more carefully than you normally would. It certainly had an effect on me. Usually I'm charging in head first, blasting whatever's in front of me, regardless of whether or not the splash damage is going to damage me or not, because that's just how I roll, damn it! Sadly, this map does not stick to its guns, or rather, gun, singular, because not long after you escape from the sewer, you get your hands on the assault rifle, which, as you are probably aware, is 100% less likely to blow you up by accident. Before long, the assault rifle is joined by the super shotgun, and consequently, the twist of the level kind of fades into the background, and it becomes much more standard feeling fare. With that said, that really shouldn't take away from the design of the level itself, particularly in the visual department. I quite like the look of it, very castle-y, rather swish, and the encounters contained therein tend to be chunky, rather satisfying affairs. In that regard, it's a map that seems to chalk up very similarly to the likes of Pleasure Drone. Well made, well paced, quite fun, but ultimately lacking the courage of conviction to wring the maximum amount of juice possible out of those intriguing setups. Ah, the King for 1,000 Years, the final stop on my journey through The Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 3, Disc 1, Electric Boogaloo, Everton 3, Liverpool 0. It's an intriguing start. You get an extended melee intro. You have to boot and prod your way through this opening section before you flail around enough to eventually discover a gun or two, one of which is situated on this side of the opening section, the assault rifle perched atop this plinth. The other, the shotgun, you'll find on the adjacent side of this section, and all things considered, this one probably has one of the more tricksy starts available in Keeper of the Seven Keys. You've got a lot of opportunity to flat out get lost, head in the wrong direction, and find yourself knee-deep in some unfortunate situations. For example, if you simply look left at the very start of the level, you'll see an elevator and think, oh, that's something to investigate. Doing so will land you face first in a pair of Hell Knights, and unless you've got the high degree of skill that I have available to me when it comes to repeatedly hitting a Hell Knight in the testicles, chances are you're not going to survive that situation for very long. After that initial bout of trial and error, you should be well on your way to being able to deal with this level proper. And in that regard, you've got a few options available to you, because this map is quite possibly one of the least linear available here in Keeper of the Seven Keys. And provided you've got guns available, each one of them is viable. My initial choice of route took me on an interesting jaunt through the waterways, eventually leading me to a rather intriguing elevator setup. The way it essentially works is you flick a switch, allowing the elevator to reach the next nearest level. You ride that up, investigate the room it lands you on, clear out whatever hellspawn dirt lurk inside, and then flick a switch, which should allow the elevator to reach the next level up. Rinse, repeat, blow up some revenants, kill a few mancubi, and for all of your efforts, you'll have granted yourself access to the red skull key switch. Sure, the destination was ever so slightly underwhelming, but hey, it's all about the journey. After that, it is pretty much a hunt for the skull keys, each of which located at disparate ends of the map, this route in particular taking you into this delightful looking water feature which is soon sullied by the riffraff on the periphery, constantly pelting you with their goddamn fireballs. Endure it long enough, however, and you may be able to enjoy a boxing match. The Red Skull Key route will take you back down that aforementioned elevator by the starting room. This time, you should be slightly more well-equipped to deal with what's in front of you, rather than having to constantly prod them in the testicles. Eventually, however, this route will lead you into an underground cavern featuring a pleasingly meaty encounter, multiple types of enemy, plenty of cover, multiple flanking routes, and all around just felt better and more fun to play through than the water feature brawl from earlier. Flipping a switch will raise a platform that allows you to acquire the Red Skull Key, upon the collection of which, I heavily advise you take advantage of the nearby teleporter. Having both skull keys will unlock a route leading to the grand finale of this map, taking you down a rather ominous hallway featuring many pickups, much ammo, very bang, and generally cluing you in that you're going to be in for a bit of a rough encounter. Dropping down the goal hole here is pretty much the point of no return, after which the following events go thusly. Oh god, is it still going? Oh god, this section is still going. Jeez. It's fun at first when you realize what's going on, when the enemies start pouring in and you're frantically trying to keep the numbers down, but I just feel like the pacing of this section is ever so slightly off, and it just keeps going, and my frame rate keeps getting lower and lower, and don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of the idea. I'm just not so much a fan of the execution. Somewhat amusingly though, once you've mopped up the last remaining enemies in the arena, you'll get your hands on the key and discover that this particular key is the key of hate. How apt. And so we officially reach the end of our grand tour of Keeper of the Seven Keys. Now originally I expected collecting all of these to unlock a big final boss battle behind that big sliding door, but no, this is most assuredly the end, crossing that threshold, kicking you out to an end screen, and I've certainly got to say I had a lot of fun with this. I've repeatedly had a lot of fun, because this is not my first rodeo with Keeper of the Seven Keys, but it's nice to come back and reconfirm how I felt about the pack as a whole. Now granted, there were a few things in that final map that irked me, but even then I wouldn't regard it as a bad map. I'd just regard it as the map in this collection that I liked the least, and I feel that that's an important distinction to make. So yeah, if you're after a map set that isn't going to take you too long to blast through, but features a nice amount of variety and creativity, not to mention some real nice propulsive feeling combat, I would not hesitate to recommend Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 3 CD1. And in that regard, if you are in fact chomping at the bit to try this for yourself, you'll find the link, as usual, in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting this channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, maybe you'd like to gain early access to my videos before anyone else, well, if that's the case, you'll find the link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.